As our population ages and as lifespans lengthen, there'll be more and more pressure on the healthcare system. The resulting increase in costs will be a drain on government finances and the economy in general. There is hope that we'll find a way to both improve the quality of healthcare and the efficiency and quality of the delivery of healthcare. That hope lies in the shift to personalized medicine and improved public health programs. These improvements are being driven by AI and blockchain. Over the next 10 years, the healthcare system will be transformed in very profound ways. I'm Doug Heinzman. I'm the Chief Catalyst at BRI. Welcome back to W3B Talks, an ongoing exploration of the impact of AI, Web3, and blockchain technologies on business and society. In this episode, we are going to look at the impact of blockchain and AI on healthcare. To help us explore this topic, I am delighted to welcome Pradeep Goel back to the podcast. Pradeep is the CEO of Solve.care Foundation. Solve.care Foundation's goal is to redefine care coordination, improve access to care, empower the consumer with information and ability, reduce benefit administration costs, and eliminate fraud and waste from healthcare and benefit administration around the world. Welcome to the podcast, Pradeep. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Doug. It's wonderful to be back, and it is going to be an exciting conversation. I really enjoy our past conversations, so looking forward to this. A very meaty subject.
Yeah, as am I. This is really the confluence of two areas that I have a lot of passion about. One is the technology, blockchain and AI, and generally how they're advancing and what impact they're going to have. But healthcare is so foundationally important to, first of all, our personal lives, but second of all, the welfare of society as a whole. And I think there is a lot of stress on the system. I think a lot of us perceive that, and certainly public policy and healthcare administrators are all, really feeling that hurt, and they're worried about where we kind of go from here. So I think we're at this really interesting transition time. I wrote a research paper for BRI a little while back that was all about the impact of Web3 and AI on the pharmaceutical industry. And in that paper, I looked a lot at personalized medicine and what technologies are driving that and what impact it's going to have. And I think there is a lot to be hopeful about, but we are going to be navigating through a pretty substantial transition. Now, since the last time we had you on the podcast, a lot's happened. Notably, there have been some amazing and very visible advances in AI, as well as some slightly less visible but very important advances in scaling and transaction privacy on blockchains. And there's been a lot of changes at Solve.care. So why don't you bring us up to speed? What have you guys been up to?
Thank you. And that's a great context. I agree with you that there's a lot of stress on the system. I would say one other thing. I think the real stress is on the people. We can talk about organizational concerns, public health concerns, government finance concerns. But really, when you look at the stress on the people, I think worldwide, the sentiment of human population is that things aren't getting better, they're getting worse. It's a confluence of factors. And healthcare aggravates that feeling, lack of access, lack of timely access, lack of affordable access is a huge concern that I hear worldwide. So I think fundamentally, the pressure is growing on the individual to somehow take care of themselves and their families with clearly dwindling resources and dwindling access overall. And that's a problem that we need to talk about later in the podcast if we have time. But I think that beyond the systematic concerns we see in pharma or in hospital organizations, public health agencies, I think the real question here is, how is the consumer doing? And I think in a nutshell, consumer isn't doing too great at the moment. And what can we do?
I think that's a really good lens to look at it through, because I think you're right. Many of us have traditionally thought about healthcare as a service, that we go along through our lives, we get sick, we go to the hospital, they patch us up, we go home. But I think we are going to be looking at this a lot more holistically, and we are now being instrumented and have the data systems and the analytics, the insight to start looking at healthcare as health in a much more holistic way. And it's not just what happens inside the confines of a doctor's office or a hospital emergency room or the like, that it has to do with how we live our lives and how we monitor things and how we accumulate the data that defines our health and how we can harvest that information to do predictive things and understand public health crises and how to respond to them effectively and how to prioritize finite resources. And I think you're exactly right. We do need to look at it from the point of view of the individual, but not only that, from this broader healthcare is welfare. It's the idea that we all want to live healthy lives and make important contributions to our families and to our business endeavors and to society as a whole. So anyway, super exciting time. And as I was looking through your website and finding out what you guys were up to, there was a few major themes that really stuck out to me that I think go to this idea that we're living through this time of accelerated change. And one of these things was this idea that you need to develop at, and these are your words, you develop at Silicon Valley pace. So the two questions. One is, what do you mean by that? And the second related question is, if you mean what I think you mean by that, what challenges has that presented and what key strategies and practices have you deployed to try to achieve this goal?
When I tell my team, and I speak about this internally constantly and more externally, that the only thing we can do at the moment is to embrace change at the velocity at it's happening. And if you look at the change that's happening around us, AI is certainly an indicator of how the change is accelerating. But the change is happening. If we don't embrace it, it'll simply run us over. So we need to adapt to it. And there are three elements of adaptation we need to really focus on. One is the tech, of course. We're a tech company. Are we adapting our tech fast enough to be useful and relevant to the consumer? And are we going to be able to deliver greater value to them tomorrow than we did yesterday? And for that, you have to have a very disciplined approach. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the velocity without discipline is chaos. If you run around in mad circles very fast, you're not getting anywhere faster. So with disciplined execution, velocity manifests into greater value to the market faster. So I tell my team, we need to be faster at everything we do, but we must be disciplined at everything we do. This is what I mean by Silicon Valley pace, that we must bring value to the consumer faster without losing control over the process and without turning the process into chaos where results are completely unpredictable and unusable. The second element of Silicon Valley pace is learning. We can only deliver value based on the knowledge we have. So are we taking in new principles, no matter how radical and irrational they may sound? Are we open to new ideas? And that's where I refer to Silicon Valley in the context of thinking outside the box, challenging the norms, and really not having many sacred cows, except few, such as integrity and the core values that define us as a good people and as a good company. So be open to whatever is happening in the market or around us and see how we can harness that to deliver better value to the consumer. And the third part of the Silicon Valley pace is really not so obvious, which is that you have to continuously focus on the revenue metric or the funding metric, because if you have the greatest idea in the world, the greatest product, but it is not being utilized. So I think the key here is utility and utilization. Building great tech isn't good enough. Getting that tech in the hands of people, getting them to use it, getting them to tell you what they don't like about it, and then responding to that quickly without digging into your own perception of the way the world should be, rather than accepting the way the world is and the way the consumer wants it to be. So this utility and utilization is a third metric, which then can be measured by revenue, which then gives you funding to invest in the first two items again. So when I speak to Silicon Valley pace, it really boils down to three things. It's about continuously innovating tech towards better value, accelerating the pace in a disciplined way, not replacing discipline with chaos and hoping something good will come out, but rather pace with driving around the racetrack without crashing into the concrete wall is the goal. You will need to drive faster on each lap, even if by 1%, it's a good thing, because in 30 laps, you'll be 30% faster. But you must maintain discipline. You must keep your hands on the steering wheel through processes and good judgment. And third is, are you measuring results or are you just celebrating great tech? And that's particularly germane in the Web3 world, where tech is being built sometimes for the sake of tech with the hope that something good will come out of it. And I find that while it is an approach similar to playing the lottery, if you really want to make an impact on people and make a lasting impact, then you got to do more than hope. Hope is not a strategy. The strategy is strategy. So those are what I mean, the 3 dimensions of Silicon Valley speed when I talk to my team. And that's what I would say here.
That's a really interesting lens. And it kind of goes to some fundamental trade-offs that all business people have to make. That, there are different phases of building a company. And at some point, you often get to a scale-up phase where the traditional philosophy has been that you need an awful lot of operational discipline. And you start figuring out how to manage your costs extremely well. And some companies, especially once they get up into managing at scale, fall into this trap where the fundamental metric they use is how are they delivering shareholder value. And the thing that I find a little scary about that is that by using that as your fundamental metric, you lose track of what customer value is. And I've always believed that you need to focus on how do I create customer value, and that shareholder value is always just a natural byproduct of being successful at that. It's an attitude change.
It is. And I can be more concrete, if I may say. When we started the year on the first pillar of speed, we had our metric that we release our platform releases, primary major releases once a quarter, minor in the middle of the quarter. So 2 releases a quarter. I set a goal for the team that by end of Q2, we're going to achieve a monthly release of the platform, which is a very significant pace accelerant, because you're talking about 3 releases versus 2, which means all your processes have to run 50% faster. And that 2 versus 3 releases may not sound like a lot, but it is a significant change in the way you would conduct requirements, you would do your designs, the way you would check the architecture, the security model, everything. And you're being asked to do that 50% faster. But the way you do it, you said the reason we want to do this is because we want to be able to respond to market consumer need faster. We want feedback loop to be quicker. There is no value in itself in accelerated releases unless they are aligned with better feedback loop. So that whole process optimization that took place in trying to achieve 3 releases a quarter versus 2 was a profound impact on the team, and it needed to be managed, and it was done. And here we are. And now we are at a monthly release. And tied to that is the third point, utility and utilization. So what? We are releasing the product every month. Who the heck cares? Now the question, is the consumer getting incremental value from each release? So what's our feedback loop look like? How are we gathering input on every release? We have a wonderful community on Telegram and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. I think hundreds of thousands of people, well, at least more than 200,000 people overall that are engaged with us and give us feedback. So let's channel that. Let's bring that into the loop of the building the product. That becomes a utility and utilization metrics. And I'm proud to say that we are now measuring ourselves not with having a few 100,000 users. We now have set our pathway towards hundreds of millions of users using our tech. And that's the only metric that in the end is a measure of real success. So I think that's the kind of concrete change one needs to enact. It's painful. It requires a lot of discipline, and it requires people to get in sync with the idea that there's a reason why we're doing this, not just for the sake of acceleration, because I'm a masochist, but because this will show us in the metrics of adoption, and that is starting to manifest. So I'm very proud of what the team has done. The same 3 metrics, the innovation velocity, it's a utilization metrics, and they're making sure that we are ultimately delivering greater value to consumer that they actually can touch, feel, and use.
You've put your finger on 2 really essential elements that kind of begs the next series of questions that I was going to go after. One is this idea that we're living in an era of very rapid change, and the technology is coming fast and furious. You wake up every morning and you now almost expect that there is some amazing new demonstration of some breathtaking new technology that you assumed was 10 years out, and suddenly it's there. We live in this age of miracles and wonders. It's really quite extraordinary. So technology and all of the things that it enables is accelerating very quickly. And the second very important point that you were on is that we also now live in a climate where we can get real-time feedback from end users to tune and tweak and do A/B testing and understand sentiment. We have the tools to consume that data and generate analytics insight, or use AI to find various different patterns that will inform the crafting of the next version of whatever we're working on. And that's a new kind of environment. We haven't seen those forces at play to nearly the extent that we have today. That being said, I think there's this inevitable trade-off that we've always had to make between balancing speed and quality. There has been this philosophy of late, and perhaps it is a byproduct or a characteristic of the age we live in, that we should fail fast, try things and see if they break. We witness SpaceX and other companies that roll prototypes out and they shoot stuff up and see if it blows up, and then they quickly iterate and they quickly have another one that goes up and you learn from it very quickly. But you're always trying to balance the speed and quality and figure out which one to focus on. You're always giving up a little bit of one to get the other. In this new kind of world, how do you reset the balance between speed and quality compared to perhaps the way that you thought about the world, 5 to 10 years ago?
There is the old adage of speed, quality, and cost. And I think to a great degree that applies to every situation, but I think it overly simplifies it. So in my worldview, and it is very clear that quality is a function of disciplined process. Quality is never an accident. If you go and read at what Hemming was teaching the Japanese in the 50s and 60s, it was about having very well-defined processes that have very strict measures that you follow. And you saw what a manufacturing powerhouse, came out of that. Not one, but many nations adopted that principle. The point I'm making is quality of presence or absence is never a function of speed in my mind. I have seen really crappy product built after 1 year of investment, and I've seen really great product built after 1 week of investment. So what's the real reason why quality suffers? The quality suffers when you don't answer 3 questions clearly on the onset. What are we building? Okay, fine. What's the actual deliverable we have? But equally importantly, why are we building this? Why is this needed? Who is it needed for? So the why has to define why are we doing this? Okay. And who will care about it? So why are we building this? Who are we building it for? And what we are doing is sort of the secondary. So if you take the time, even in a highly compressed time frame, and you answer those questions clearly, you'll be surprised the difference in quality. Actually, you shouldn't be surprised that quality will be greater. This is point number 1. I will use the analogy that this is a well-established fact that a doctor that spends 5 minutes per patient extra to explain to them their rationale of their diagnosis, the prognosis, and why the doctor is prescribing certain medications or prescribing certain tests or recommending certain lifestyle changes. 5 minutes extra. Those doctors have 80% less patient lawsuits. So their quality of deliverable is deemed to be 4 times higher than those who don't spend that 5 minutes extra. So you want to achieve quality, especially in tech, then make sure that your scope and your requirements and your justification is not just well documented, but well understood by people, including the tech developers, the QA, the BA, the product manager, the marketing person. Because look, you can build the greatest tech all day long. If it is not clearly understood, then they will lose their way along the way. This is point number 1. I don't think that quality is a function of speed. Quality is a function of discipline. Having well thought through processes that actually ask the tough questions at the front end. So this is point 1. I have not experienced the direct loss in quality when we accelerated by 50%. In fact, to the contrary, now that we have adopted this long-held belief in practice that spending the extra 30 minutes, an hour or 2 or a day, even if you only have 7 days to do the job, if you can spend half a day to really ensure that you understand the what, the why, the who, and the before you get into the how and the when, you will get a better how and a better when. Okay, so this is point 1. Point number 2 is that when you're moving in disciplined velocity, like you use SpaceX as an example, rocket ships don't go around in circles trying to climb up. They go straight up. Their trajectory is very sharp. And if you veer off that trajectory, even by a degree or 2, the ship is going to burn up. those rocket ships have a very defined trajectory of ascent. In any kind of an innovative company, your trajectory of ascent needs to be defined, but you can allow for less of a payload. You can say, I'm not going to pack the ship with 80 pounds of satellites, I'm going to pack in 50, but this will let me be guaranteed that this trajectory will be met. What I tell my team, to use that analogy, process is inviolate, you cannot violate that. The date is inviolate, you cannot violate that, but you can lighten the payload. You can put less on the mothership when it's taking off. And you can say, this time we're going to put only 500 pounds of satellites, not 600. That's okay. Because if we have disciplined velocity, and we have always answered the question in the beginning, the what, the why, and for whom, then less payload will not severely impact you. In most cases, in some cases, yes, some payload is essential. You have to do it. But in most cases, you can afford to trim back on the payload. And once you begin to develop that disciplined trajectory, you would be surprised how quickly the muscle builds in the company. And now putting extra payload on doesn't feel like a big deal because they know the rocket ship's going to get there anyway. So they can start stacking up extra 5 pounds, then extra 10 pounds, because they have confidence the ship is not going to burn up in orbit. So people start to think differently. They start to act differently. So it takes about 6 months to a year to build that muscle memory in people and mental muscle memory. But once you establish a disciplined process, once you establish clear understanding of the what and the why and for whom we are doing this, and you say the dates are inviolate, the process is inviolate, clarity is a must at the beginning of any venture, then it seems to me the rocket ships take off on time and they seem to get into orbit every time.
Amazing, isn't it? Let's make the pivot into the healthcare space. You touched on some doctor-patient scenarios. And let's start that pivot by talking about clinical trials. I've been watching the personalized medicine space evolve, and one of the critical parts of it that I think has to change are trials. The gold standard for clinical trials has always been large randomized studies with double-blind and all that kind of stuff. And we test against that trial population. And if a pharmaceutical, for example, demonstrates a certain level of efficacy, and there's a threshold that it's got to demonstrate, pick some number, 85% efficacy, before it will get approved. But it turns out that the efficacy within a very narrow part of the population with a particular molecular discrimination, that you may be able to demonstrate extremely high levels of efficacy of a particular drug relative to the overall population. And as we start to be able to do genomic testing and start to be able to discriminate populations and put them in specific buckets of people, that we have the potential of dramatically expanding the number of drugs and therapeutics that are available for various different kinds of populations. But for that to happen, we need to really rethink the whole clinical trial space. And I saw that you've released a product called Care.Trials, and you're partnering with the Philippine Alliance of Patient Organizations and pioneering some of the use of blockchain and AI in clinical trials. How do you see these technologies enabling the kind of transition in the clinical trial space? I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think we need.
Yes, we are doing some really, for me, very personally meaningful and exciting, impactful work. I'm really excited about Care Trials, and it's going to impact every single listener sooner than they realize. But let me lay it out in simple terms of why we built Care Trials and why we're excited about it and why it matters even, because it's not just another tech. First thing is that clinical research today is the domain of the privileged or the highly knowledgeable. Clinical research happens in esteemed organizations. You can call them ivory towers or very well-defined research establishments. And they conduct the research, and then they handpick the patients that they happen to know or have access to. And those are the people who participate. And the average person doesn't know, doesn't care, doesn't see the value. But it's a false premise. The whole model is wrong. Because if you really want to cure cancer, if you really want to live to 100 years without developing chronic disease along the way, and if you want to have a different society where health is equally accessible and kids don't die from lack of a simple antibiotic, then we need to have humanity engaged in research. Now, That's a bold statement. Most people don't care. And even if they know about it, they will think of clinical research as a guinea pig experiment. I don't want to be experimented on. I don't know what kind of drugs you'll put in my system, and all those fears based on lack of engagement, information, and relevance. Most of humanity does not see clinical research relevant to them. Truth couldn't be further from that, because every one of us, when we need care, are hoping for that miracle cure to be available in a syringe or in a pill or in the hands of a doctor. Where does that cure come from? It arrives through clinical research, right? What used to kill kings and queens not 100 years ago now is a common pill, costs you 30 cents. What used to define dynasties is now a simple test to know whether you're pregnant or not. People have been beheaded for having simple diseases that we can cure with a simple antibiotic. The world is different, but the world isn't where it needs to be. So how do we make clinical research relevant to every single human being? And that's the mission of CARE Trials. And when you ask that question, why doesn't my mother care about clinical research? Why doesn't your neighbor know or care about it? It always goes back to the same thing. One, they don't know. Second, it's not relevant to them, even if they know. And third, they're scared because they don't want to be experimented on. So we launched CARE Trials to build the first global patient-centric, patient-respectful, patient-oriented community where we are saying you have a reason to participate in the research. You have safety in participating in our research community, even though you may not be experimented, you will not be experimented on because you will know your rights. You will know who's conducting and why they're conducting the research and what the ethical and clinical rules of this trial are. And you also will see relevance to it to your life because this is going to actually help the humanity find cure for diseases that are going to affect you or your family. So CARE Trials is a bold statement built on a Web3 blockchain and some degree of AI to make clinical research a household name, to make clinical research part of everybody's vernacular that, look, I am interested in advancing cure for cancer. And our motto for CARE Trials is let's find cure for cancer faster. Will we get there someday? Yes, we will. But who knows? Another 50 years, another 100 years? Why don't we pool together our collective human power and do this right? That's the mission. Now, why is blockchain and AI relevant here? Patient privacy, patient rights, patient trust, patient security, and their ability to join or research trials and investigate whether they are a good fit or not in a manner that does not violate their choices, does not violate their sovereignty as a human being. We have built this unique model and gamified it where average human can download the Care Wallet, participate in CARE Trials, and do so in a manner that is 100% respectful of their rights and their choices. And we built an AI model to tell you about your rights and choices in a way that a doctor or a pharmaceutical company will not or cannot. So this is CARE Trials. It's the convergence of tech to solve a real human need. How do we live better? And forget us, I want to have our kids live better because I want to leave them a world better than what we found it. And if we are not going to conquer these disastrous diseases that we still have, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, COPD, these diseases continue to afflict us. Midlife, we all run up against these diseases and our quality of life collapses. I don't want to have the next generation go through that unnecessarily. So CARE Trials is about a global view of every trial in the world can benefit by engaging patients through CARE Trials to find the right participants no matter where in the world and get them engaged through a respectful, equitable communication where you cannot solicit or farm their data. And this is the last thing I want to say. I hate the idea that patients' data is being mined and then solicitations are being sent out by trial enrollment intermediaries and data mining companies who basically mine some EMR, electronic medical record system, find a couple of hundred people who are possibly a good fit for the trial, and they start spamming and scamming them into joining the trial. This is wrong. How are you going to earn patient trust if you're going to start off by violating their trust in the very first step? So we have turned the model. We have said, no patient identity is known. No patient data is aggregated. No patient's data is mined. Individualized cases, patient is matched to the trial's inclusion and exclusion criteria based on patient-controlled data that they don't have to send to somebody else. So it's about bringing that eligibility logic to the patient's data rather than sending the data to the eligibility logic. In other words, let's be serious about respecting the patient, because you know what? If you treat the patient like a subject, they're going to show up and say, thank you very much. Who the heck are you to treat me like a subject? But when you engage them properly from the beginning, and even if you engage only 2% of humanity, that's 150 million people who today couldn't care less about clinical trials. So CARE trials, to me, is the right application of Web3, user-owned web, with AI that comes to you to answer your questions using your data, and blockchain that protects your identity and your security. And you know what? If we can do this to advance care, then there is a legacy to be proud of. And there's an economic value for pharma and for research organizations and for governments that runs into trillions. So that's the two sides of it. And you can tell how passionate I am about it, because it's about time we stop talking about patient-centric healthcare and actually started treating patient like a patient rather than a statistic. So this CARE trials goes to the heart of patient rights, patient identity, patient control over their data, patient's right to choose, patient's right to stay anonymous, patient's rights to say no thank you, or patient's right to say, I'll be interested if you compensate me correctly. Those conversations are impossible in the clinical trial space today. And we are bringing that conversation to happen. And people love it. You know, we are seeing the kind of growth none of our other solutions have seen. We're seeing people say, yeah, I'll use a blockchain-based product if it gives me, if it respects my identity. So we are very excited. We see the clinical trials truly as a pathway to 1 billion users, not today, but definitely in a foreseeable future, because it touches upon a very basic human need. I want to live healthier. I want to live longer. And sure as heck, I want my kids to live healthier and better than I did. That's what we are going after.
Hear and greatly admire the passion that you have about this topic. You've kind of preempted some of the questions that I was going to be asking, but let me just see that make sure I've got this correct. The fundamental idea here is that, especially as we're moving into this era of personalized medicine and the idea that we're not using completely large-scale randomized clinical trial populations, that we need to have focus. So the idea is that I, as an individual, either because I have an altruism that wants me to contribute to the larger corpus and the larger welfare, or perhaps because I have a family history, or because someone in my family is affected by something, or myself, that then a whole bunch of data is collected. The data is protected such that if some either academic or pharmaceutical investigation wants to come in and says, I've got a hypothesis around a particular, let's for argument's sake, say it's a drug, and I need to test it against a particular profile to find out its efficacy and its side effects, et cetera, that they could then come to this community, interact with the abstracted, anonymized information to assemble the right construct for the clinical trial, and that only then would those people that were selected by virtue of whatever the algorithm is would be then contacted and engaged in that clinical trial. Have I got that right, more or less?
Yes, in a nutshell, you got it right. It's about creating a global community in an anonymized fashion where patients have the right to find, browse, connect, explore with the research happening around them based on geography and disease conditions. And it allows them to do so in a manner where they can actually interact with and even have their eligibility verified without revealing their identity. And at some point, if they find the trial to be compelling and relevant to them or their family, then they have the ability to say, okay, I want to engage. But till they do so, their identity, their data is solely in their control, and no one is going to be able to mine the data or spam them with solicitations, but rather you have the absolute assurance of privacy, anonymity, and control over this choice. So if I'm browsing, I don't know, pick something, sensitive, the last thing I'm going to want to do is to respond to some email and go to some website and enter my name, address, telephone number, and age, gender, and say, yeah, I'm ready to talk about this highly sensitive topic. Really? I don't know if that website is sitting, on a server in Syria or in China or wherever else that I don't want my data to be. And I don't know who's going to look at this information. So the whole clinical trial model is based on soliciting patients. And solicitation is bad because solicitation leads to my immediate reaction that you have my data and you're using it in unauthorized solicitation. I didn't want to be solicited. Who gave you my information? And if it turns out to be my doctor, I hate it even more. How dare you violate my trust? How dare you use my medical necessity as a tool for marketing? So the fundamental model for clinical trials enrollment worldwide for every trial is patient solicitation based, which violates their trust in the day one, step one. No wonder majority of humanity doesn't want to be part of trials. We flipped that model and said, we are going to inform you. We're going to give you objective AI-centric LLM that will let you ask tough questions and get clear answers about what the risks and rewards of joining a trial are and what its relevance to you is. Your identity is never revealed. Your data never leaves your wallet. And your eligibility and relevance to the trial and the trial's relevance to your life is established unequivocally by a party that has no ability to mine or solicit you. So you can go in and search for trials that are happening within 5 kilometers of you or 500 kilometers of where you live or worldwide. And the impact is very profound because we all know somebody who is struggling with some disease. We may be healthy, but we know somebody who is not. And I'll tell you a little bit later, the personal anecdote that happened to me in February that made me go, we are on the right track and we're going to go all in. So bottom line is CARE Trials flips the model completely, says to the patient, you are in charge. We are here to serve you. And if you find our service to be valuable, you decide if you want to engage. And at no point will we seek or capture your identity or your data till such time where you make that decision that you want to be part of the trial.
Can anyone join this community?
Yes, it's wide open.
It's wide open. Wow.
Currently available in 80 plus countries. Our fastest growth is happening in areas like Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. That area, that geography, APAC, is where we are mostly focused on right now in terms of getting people to understand and adopt. But it's wide open. It's worldwide. I mean, it's not worldwide. It's 80 countries, and we are adding more countries as we go along.
So this seems to me a really compelling use case for some of this, the state-of-the-art blockchain technology out there. Another emerging set of use cases has to do with governance. The idea that a community can express its will and that the community can evolve and adapt and innovate based on that communal interest. I noticed that you had also released a basis for some new networks I think it's called Care.pilot, that you've introduced some governance and voting capabilities for new dApps deployed into these networks. Can you elaborate on how that community voting mechanism works and how you've overcome or addressed some of the perennial challenges of doing distributed governance?
Distributed governance definitely is not easy, but it is essential in certain areas, and it's only a good fit in some scenarios. And we believe that we are a great fit. But before I answer governance, let's see what they're governing. Over the last 7 years, Solve.care has been building really powerful enterprise-oriented application networks. So these application networks are incredibly useful for an organization like a pharma, hospital, insurance company, government agency, clinical network, pharmacy network, what have you, who have consumers to serve. This is a B2B2C approach to market. So our B2B clients built cool networks, which they then made available to their cool customers. But in that scenario, we were the entity that were building these networks for them, and then they were benefiting from them financially and operationally. Over the years, especially in the last 12 months, we have migrated our entire technology infrastructure to where third parties can build these networks themselves. We've introduced a lot of tools and documentation and APIs and things like that, which allow these networks to be built and actually to be built pretty fast. As we move towards a really open sourcing the platform, which we are in the midst of doing, as we move towards making our platform available, our infrastructure available to everybody, we recognize that all kinds of use cases, be it simple or very complex use cases, can be and will be addressed on a platform. So then, how are we going to govern that? Are we going to be like Apple, who is going to check every app and all the app source code and check to make sure your app doesn't violate Apple App Store rules? And will we be the governance on the App Store? Because we're basically building a Web3 App Store. And we built it, and now it's ready to be built. And more people are starting to build independent apps and independent app networks. And there's two levels of, you can either just build an app and launch it on an existing network, or you can build a brand new network and let other people publish apps on it and your own. So effectively, you can use our app store or build your own app store, and then you can publish, and control what apps you want on it. So with that kind of a decentralization, we don't want to be the sole authority in the room, making the decision on which app stays and which app goes, or which app network should be fired up and which should be. That governance is what we are shifting to the community. In that, the whole governance model is around, okay, so what kind of apps are permissible on the Care platform? Do we want to allow certain types of games? Do we want to allow certain types of DeSci projects or DeFi projects? And we want to allow projects that are very specific regionally. Solve.care wants to hand that control to the community. And we know that the community is never totally homogenous. Even democracies are not perfect. We recognize that governance is going to be ultimately not a perfect democratic exercise, but it will be transparent. My team always talks about whether we should allow one vote per Solve token, whether we should allow one vote for Care Wallet. And I say to them, it actually doesn't matter. What matters is that all the votes are public, that all the voting is open, that anybody can vote, that those who wish to vote can, they're not prohibited, and that we do allow voting to be fully transparent and on the chain and verifiable. Yes, there are some nuances to that, but long and short of it is, we are going for transparent governance. We're going for the fact that every network that's being launched can be launched with a governance vote. And if a network misbehaves, if a network harms the consumer or violates a law, then governance can shut it down. So that's the idea of the governance we are going after, which is basically saying decisions around apps and app networks and their relevance to consumers around the world and their applicability and relevance to humanity as well as compliance with law is a function that will be determined through the community governance rather than me being the God. That's what we have implemented.
There's kind of two questions that occur to me. One is, what is the basis for voting? Are you working on a one person, one vote, or do different people have different amounts of stake that represent a greater weighting in the community? What is the fundamental democratic currency?
Well, we cannot do one person per vote for the simple reason that we will need to know the identity of the person. I can only assure that the same person is not voting twice if I know the identity of that person.
Or if you have a soul-bound token, but sure.
Right, but still, that token has to be issued by somebody.
Yep.
And that token would have to be tied to some kind of an identity check.
Which in some geographies, there may be a national identity that could do that, but your point's very well taken. So, okay.
Correct. So the point is that if we want to link people's ability to vote to a singular human identity, we need that identity verifier somewhere. And that person will not be us. We will never, since we are an anti-data collection company, I tell our team, we are the anti-Facebook. We will never aggregate people's data and mine it and monetize it. That's just not who we're going to be ever, because that's exactly what's wrong with Web 2, is aggregation of my data, your data, for the benefit of a central authority. No matter what service they offer me, ultimately they are aggregating way, way too much information about me, far more than I ever agreed to. And the trade-off is, if you want to use my Facebook, you must tell me everything about yourself. I'm not willing to make that trade-off. I don't want my kids to make that trade-off. So we are not interested in capturing human identity. We're not interested in capturing human data for centralization, monetization, and aggregation. We are interested in delivering choices to the consumer and giving them more choices and not taking away their right to their information. So having said that, we believe that identity-based tokens may be relevant for very limited scenarios. Identity-based tokens make sense for people who want to publish networks, who want to launch apps, because they have a reason to provide us certain information about themselves, because we need to ensure that they're not malicious. The community needs to ensure they're not malicious actors. Simple fact, we don't want a very popular game to be launched on a platform and have the proceeds go to a terrorist organization. We don't want to facilitate that. So we can put identity constraints on the enterprise, but not on the consumer. The beneficiary of a network, the one who is going to monetize the network, we need to know who they are, but we don't need to know who the players of the game are.
Sure.
So that being said, our governance model is basically a balance between token ownership is not, is also unfair because if I have more money, I have more power. What we went with is one wallet. Because you can only have one Care Wallet person per device, we went with the idea that majority of humanity has 1, 2, 3 devices. And if you run Care Wallet on that device, then you have one vote. So it's one wallet per vote is where we went with it. And if we want to then further tighten the voting rules, we can easily go into the wallet and publish a requirement for a token that will further tighten their access. But one wallet, one vote is where we are today.
That's probably a pragmatic approximation that gets you to a pretty good result. And the second part of the question was, I'm assuming that the Care Pilot platform is built on the Solve.care platform?
Correct, it is.
In my reading, I saw that not only was there this new governance framework that allowed for these community votes, but also that you had introduced some new tokenomics. And you touched upon tokens and expressed the idea that a raw token-based voting system is problematic because it prejudices people that have the resources to accumulate tokens and associates voting with rights. The question is, what is the tokenomics mechanism in the new platform, and how are you planning to use it?
Let me summarize it, because this is quite deep, but let me make it simple this way. We are now allowing people to build their own chains on our platform, launch their own app chains. And since we are allowing people to then invite apps to be built on their chain and invite builders to build chain apps and publish them, Solve.care has launched multiple health chains, D-side chain for care trials, normal healthcare chain through Care Pilot. So if you're going to build an app as a builder in Singapore and you want to build an app for making appointments to the dentist and instant payment in tokens, and you want that to be an automatic escrow till the dental procedure is done and the patient clicks on I'm happy, that's the journey. Now, you can build that and you would probably want to publish that on one of the health chains. Why? Because adjacency gives you power. If you put that app out on the App Store, you have to spend all this time and money to somehow get people to download the app and use it. If you put it on Care platform, on one of the health chains, already all the other users of that chain who might be there because they want other services become adjacent and immediate population for you to tap into. So by publishing your apps on a chain that are aggregating consumers for a variety of reasons gives you this aggregated patient pool, which will make you enormously more successful than if you went out on your own. That being the premise, each of these chains can be staked. So when you stake a chain, when you launch a chain, you have to stake it, or you can get the community to stake it. That's one thing we introduced in Solve 2.0 is community-backed app chains. Then as a result of that, we also allowed and require these app chains to share a piece of their revenue into a community pool. A small percentage, but meaningful in the sense that if you have 20 app chains feeding in 3% of their revenue, you're gathering a really substantial amount of revenue in this community pool, which the community can govern and sponsor more app chains, can sponsor more apps, can sponsor more innovation. So the idea being that we have created that ultimate Web3 infrastructure that many have tried to build, but they have always nibbled at a specific layer. I'm building the fast blockchain. I'm building the off-chain data handling layer. I'm building the better, faster, smart contracts. Everybody's been building these little layers and hoping that they will all somehow eventually connect to give a framework. And we said, no, that's not the right way to do it. Let's build the entire Web3 stack. Let's build it in a properly decentralized way, and let's bring it to market. That's what took us 7 years to do. But now that we have it, we need to allow open access to this infrastructure. This is the manifestation of everything Web3 dreams about. And then we got to make it realistically achievable in the market, because you can build the greatest tech in the world, what I said at the beginning. If there is no utility and adoption, what did you accomplish? So this app chain and Solve2 tokenomics model is all driven to that one single goal: better utilization, more utility, and massive adoption isn't achievable by each one of us publishing our own apps on the App Store and then individually trying to promote and get adoption on it. Let the app chains be the adoption vehicle. Let the community stand behind the chain as a collective, and let the app chain then create this network effect between apps on the chain, and let the chains interact with each other to create network effect between the chains. And now you have this mechanism where I could come into an app chain to do a very specific thing, like buy an antibiotic at the cheapest possible price and have it shipped to my house, and it's a $3 transaction, and I expect to be done forever. How do we take such a user who has a single point of need and convert them into a multiple user of multiple apps? That's the function of the app chain. And that's a function of the network of chains that the platform represents. In a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is the whole Solve.2 tokenomics is engineered to drive greater utility and adoption by the consumer. That's what this whole Solve.2 is around. 1.0 was all about facilitating payments and paying for gas and allowing apps to execute and to have enough nodes in the app infrastructure. You were paying for that using Solve. You were allowing for payment between parties. That's Solve 1.0. Solve 2.0, in a single nutshell, is about how do I get the next billion users using the Care Wallet.
This is a great story about a company embracing the potential of Web3 and experimenting with a lot of the emerging pieces of it. I assume that you're doing a lot of zero knowledge stuff in here for privacy and scaling issues and dealing with all these very complex governance issues. This is very exciting to hear about, and I really appreciate the potential of making a significant impact in the healthcare industry by engaging people in these very creative and new ways that are enabled by this Web3 technology. My final question to you, I'll break into just a couple parts here. It has to do with ethics. People are asking some tough questions about, as these very exciting new technologies are evolving so quickly and are intersecting something as sensitive as the healthcare space, don't we have to be very careful and deal with ethical issues? You've already touched upon the privacy component and explained to us how blockchain technology is allowing an abstraction of privacy that allows things to be very functional while protecting people's rights and the privacy of their own healthcare records and histories, etc. But as we look at some of the AI tools, the first part of the question is, what do you see the emerging ethical issues that we're going to have to be dealing with beyond the privacy consideration? And the related question of how do we then navigate or help shape the regulatory landscape in such a way that these technologies can be most productively applied to improve the quality and the efficiency of the healthcare system?
This is a very loaded topic. I will tell you what I believe, and I'm very clear on the concerns. AI is a great potential for us to automate mundane tasks, to accelerate our understanding of the universe we live in. It's definitely a way better tool for learning than web searching was, because this is much more of a synthesized view, but it also has enormous risks. And the risk that I fear, that I see present and right in front of us, imminent, isn't even the AI as a technology enslaving us, but rather a few companies controlling the infrastructure for AI to run, and therefore having extreme power through the use of our data on our society. I think there are two angles to this. One is who controls the infrastructure for AI, because they're going to determine who gets to access AI. And it gives me absolutely as close to a nightmare as one can have while you're awake, is the idea that a few Silicon Valley brats are going to control almost all the AI compute power in the world, at least in the near term. And they will use that resource access not for the benefit of humanity, no matter what we would want them to do, but rather to monetize our data at a ferocious pace for maximizing their profitability. This is terrifying, because it's one thing for a company to monetize our data, to profit from it, but AI gives them the power to use that data to shape our lives. Every single aspect of our life can be shaped by using AI and our data. So I am very concerned, in a very simple nutshell, the gatekeepers to AI are a greater threat than AI itself, because we have very, very few companies positioning themselves as the gatekeepers. Through them is how you will get to AI. Otherwise, you don't get to use AI, but they get to use AI however they see fit, but we won't. None of us are going to have, a 1,000-blade NVIDIA giga computer that Elon Musk is talking about building using public dollars. And then he controls that compute power. And that compute power gives him unprecedented velocity of insights and also makes him the gatekeeper. He decides if he doesn't like you, he shuts you out of his AI giga computer. Your company's out. My company's in, your company's out, because he likes me, he doesn't like you. That is unprecedented concentration of power. We cannot let this happen, because forget the actual AI promise. You're actually allowing a few companies to determine who gets to access it. And that's one issue. The second issue is...
I think that you put your finger on a very important point. There are significant barriers to entry, both in terms of the size of the data sets required to train these AI systems, as well as the physical compute resource and associated energy resource to properly perform that training. We're talking about very, very big numbers that are the purview and domain of a very small number of companies, and that's fair enough. And on top of that, I suspect that there may be some pretty powerful natural monopoly powers at work in this marketplace, because after all, why would you ever want to use the world's second best diagnostics engine? You'd always want to use the world's first best. So I think there is going to be a big mover advantage, and there are some natural monopoly forces that will make it difficult to get into that space, which of course begs the second half of my question about, well, okay, those are very legitimate fears. How do we navigate those fears while hopefully harnessing the power of this technology to create a whole bunch of very exciting value? And how do we shape the regulatory environment to make all that work?
This is a complex question, but I think there is a very clear answer we all need to pursue. You need to have a decentralized AI fabric that exists in parallel, encounters in capacity and through open access, guarantees availability of compute resources to everyone. If we are not going to ensure, if we're going to allow the gatekeepers to control the access to AI, the benefits of those AI will accrue to a few. Point two, our data is what makes AI intelligent. Our actions, our daily actions, where we are, whether we take a walk or whether we sit in the chair, all this data is being fed into AI without our permission. And we need to find a way quickly to control that, the continuous data vacuum that's sucking up every available data point about humanity. And we need to decide whether all our data belongs here. Now, thankfully, right now, what is scraping is publicly available data. But you can be guaranteed that sooner or later, it's going to start digging deeper into our personal data. But that's where the gold mine is. And all this investment, when Sam Altman talks about $7 trillion in AI infrastructure, right there is a statement. How are you going to pay for $7 trillion worth of investment? By making 70 trillion, right? How are you going to make 70 trillion? You're going to make that by monetizing AI. And how is AI going to monetize that? It's going to monetize our humanity. So that's where we need to have an absolute understanding that AI does not and should not have a concentrated beneficiaries, concentrated gatekeepers, and at the same time, leveraging what is public human knowledge and our private data. So I think the line where we can draw is, okay, public data can be consumed, but private data cannot be consumed without my consent. This is my second big take on AI. And the third thing that I think is really important in all this is AI needs to come to me. Instead of me chatting with ChatGPT in the cloud, I need the ChatGPT to run in my wallet against my data with a guarantee that it's not going to use my data in any way that is adverse or non-permissible use of my data. So I want to localize AI. I want the AI to run against my data for my sole benefit, meaning that is collective learning makes it as smart as a doctor, but I want the doctor to look at my individual information, give me my diagnosis, and not use that data as some kind of a universal, permission to monetize my data for me. I think those are my 3 points, which is the gatekeepers are extremely dangerous for humanity. Second, AI needs to be made universally accessible and data needs to be consumed with consent. And third, I want AI to come to interact with my data instead of me sending my data to interact with AI. Those, I think, are the ways we will achieve a better outcome for humanity. Otherwise, I fear that our kids will be slaves of very, very few powers in the world. We are returning back to excessive concentration of power, and we're making the new kinds of monarchy. And that monarchy is those who control the AI infrastructure. This is my view.
Wow. Well, on that extremely profound thought, I think we are going to wrap up this episode. So thank you so much, Pradeep, for joining us today. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of W3B Talks. You can find more information about Solve.care at Solve.care. You can also find out more information about this, as well as many other topics, at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to our newsletter. I'm your host, Doug Heintzman. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode and that you will join us for our next episode of W3B Talks. Thanks again, Pradeep.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, everyone listening.
Take care. Bye.